Wow, these 6 writers can change the whole life of a person. Short stories, perhaps the best type of literary creations because of less words and at the same time high amount of impression it has. I really love short stories because you can read them in one sitting and then it engages your mind for a really long time. Hello my dearest friends, welcome to another video about literature. My name is Sohail, and if you're interested in topics related to literature, reading, literary criticism and so on, hit that subscribe button to watch my future videos as well. And this video concerns with the 6 most influential short story writers in the world literature, and it is very important to know them, especially if you're new to the task of reading. It is important to mention that before 19th century, the short story was not regarded as a distinct literary form, and although we can say that it seems a uniquely modern genre, the short prose fiction is nearly as old as the language itself. In this video, we are not going to talk about the history of the short story and this genre, and you can find easily the contents about the background and the literary background of this specific kind of writing. In this video, we are going to talk about the masters of short story writing in the world in all times. The first author I'm going to talk about is the Russian genius Nikolai Gogol. Gogol is one of the most gifted writers in the whole literature, and he was a kind of follower and imitator of Pushkin in literary style. The subjects of his short stories, like most of the Russian writers of the time, is Russia itself and the observations he has of people and of society. The interesting fact about Gogol is that although his goal was to create an idealized Russia towards which his countrymen might be inspired to progress, he was unable to do that because Gogol was a masterful capturer of human failings, and he couldn't portray that picture because he was incapable of imagining how it would be like to have an idealized society. He couldn't imagine that. The reason why Gogol is considered a great short story writer is that he is able to touch the mundane and fantastic topics briefly and beautifully, making his reading a very immediate and stimulating experience. Among his greatest short stories, I recommend A Diary of a Madman, The Nose, and also The Overcoat, which are at the highest point in his literary career. Please don't forget this writer because he was a great model for the later Russian writers such as Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. For the second writer, we should go to the American literature to say that the thrilling, exciting, horror and scary stories of Edgar Allan Poe are famous around the world. We can consider Poe as a writer with romantic tendencies, with lots of appreciated techniques, including his keen and sound judgment as an appraiser of contemporary literature, his idealism and musical gifts as a poet, and his dramatic art as a storyteller, which secured him a prominent place among the universally well-known men of letters. One of the outstanding facts about Edgar Allan Poe is the concept of a strange duality, which you should absolutely consider when you read his works, because we observe a kind of coexistence of 2 contrary persons in him and also in his characters. Among his greatest short stories, I recommend you The Raven, The Black Cat, The Cask of Amontillado, and also, of course, The House of Usher. And now, the third author, considered one of the fathers of modern short story writing, which is from French literature, Guy de Maupassant. Guy de Maupassant is a prolific writer, and his deeply admired body of works influenced a great number of writers, including O. Henry, Anton Chekhov, Kate Chopin, and also Henry James. Unlike 99% of writers in literature, he was very famous during his lifetime, and he had the good fortune to see his stories were widely read. Guy de Maupassant had also experiences in war, which provides the setting for most of his stories, especially those suffering stories of innocent civilians caught in the war's path. The best short stories by Guy de Maupassant which I can recommend are, of course, The Necklace, Bol du Suif or The Dumpling, Two Friends, and also The Piece of String. If I want to talk about the concerns and atmosphere of Maupassant's stories, I should say that he was a naturalist, a pessimistic kind of naturalist, let's say, who was harsh and merciless when it comes to depicting the human nature. The next writer is another American genius, a cultural icon, a literary force much greater than his image, an archetype of rugged masculinity, and a romantic ideal of intellectual in perpetual exile, Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway is one of the most experienced writers of all times, and his works are highly influenced by the conditions in World War I. And I really love this author because among all the writers I read in these years, no one depicts the human nature and human behavior as beautiful as Hemingway does. Hemingway was also a journalist, and this affects his writing style. For example, we see short sentences and also simple language, but the language is ironic. I mean, it is based on his iceberg theory. This means that the symbolism in his writing is very important, and you must be aware of the abundant symbols he uses in his literary works. It is a very hard task to introduce some of his best short stories because all of them are great, but if I want to select from them, I would recommend a very short story, which is the original title, Cat in the Rain, which I love very much, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Hills Like White Elephants, and also A Clean Well-Lighted Place. And for the final story, I recommend Soldier's Home. Please write down the names of these stories. You shouldn't miss them. And this is very necessary to read Hemingway. I really love him. The author number 5 is the one I talked about lately and completely in another video. A Russian inspirational writer, Anton Chekov. I will put the link of that video in the description down below. Check that and be sure to watch this video for more information. Anton Chekhov is also a prolific writer, both in the case of short stories and also dramatic plays. He belongs to the movement of realism in literature, but he sometimes gets close to the tenets of modernism, especially in his short stories. And many writers, including the famous Raymond Carver, considered Anton Chekhov as the best short story writer of all times. The best short stories by Anton Chekhov that I would recommend are The Chameleon, The Death of a Statesman, The Student, The Darling, and also Wonka. The last best short story writer is from Argentina, Jorge Luis Borges, who is considered one of the classics of 20th century literature. He belongs to the movement of postmodernism, and he was well known and famous after his death when he was compared to writers like Samuel Beckett and also Franz Kafka. Borges is one of the complex writers in literature because he rarely used metaphors or similes, and he always chose the simplest, the most accurate kinds of words, and he never, almost never, wrote a story more than 10 pages, and yet he created some of the most unusual and complex fiction of the century. This is very strange and somehow contrary, but makes this author a kind of special and interesting kind of short story writer. One of the information we need to ponder is that Borges was also an essay writer, and this affects his writing. What I mean by that? I mean that his works are self-conscious. I mean half fiction and half essay, because we see the writer entering the work of fiction. He is intruding the work. He's coming to the work as a character and also as a critic. So we see Borges and we feel the presence of him in the work of fiction we are reading. From the numerous short stories written by Borges, I would recommend The Garden of Forking Path, The Lottery in Babylon, also The Circular Ruins, and the famous important work Telon Ukbar Ubris Tertius. Oh, I cannot believe I say that without mistake. That was a hard name. And this is the end of this valuable list of authors in the genre of short stories. Be sure to pay attention to these types of writings because my experiences in reading show that short stories always surprise us in the level of literariness and also their thematic values. Thanks for watching. Take care.